Hello and welcome to the first ISJ Leaders in Security podcast.
My name is James Thorpe and I'm the editor of International Security Journal. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Mo Ahddoud, CEO of Chameleon Cyber Consultants, Sarb Sembhi, CTO of Virtually Informed, and John Rogers, the Global Head of Incident Response for WithSecure. It's great to be speaking with you all today, and I'm really excited to jump in and begin this discussion. And when it comes to cybersecurity and digital safety, I think in 2023, whilst many business leaders are aware of the do's and don'ts and what the general landscape looks like, there is still a long way to go when it comes to truly informing people about the controls they have in place to mitigate an attack, what an attack actually looks like in practice, and also how they can prepare for the inevitability of one, because I think that's a really important thing in today's landscape. So, when we've all caught up before this discussion, we're keen to look at ideas of leadership, spreading education and informing people, and also addressing what can be a false sense of security when it comes to cybersecurity. And with that, I think a good place to start is from a cybersecurity perspective, what would you say as industry leaders and advisors are kind of the key threats that specifically SMEs are facing in 2023?
So at the moment, the question you asked is a really good question, because the first thing I think we've got to think about is that small organisations have got limited time to do things. It's not like they can do everything. So with that in mind, if we that poses a challenge and a difficulty for SMEs, in the sense that if we look at what the key threats have been over the last year, the National Cybersecurity Centre has actually produced a report earlier this year in April, and they identified that one of the biggest attacks for SMEs was phishing. But that's over the last 12 months. That doesn't explain what the current threats are and where the threats are going to be. And to understand those things, you need to be looking at what's going on right now and what's been going on. And it's a combination of things. And that's why it's a challenge for small businesses, in that they've got to keep up with what the threats were, because they are probably still under threat from those, and they've got to keep in touch with what's been going on according to their own threat landscape and their own threat surface. So there's a whole multitude of things, and all of these words I've used, they're okay for us technical people, but for the SMEs, it's too much for them, and they can't understand all of that. So really, it's trying to put into perspective the top 5 things you probably need to do right now in terms of threats, but what are the other things you need to do to make sure that you've actually got a good base to work on, that you can respond in the right ways when the right time comes. And that's difficult as well. I'll stop there and let my colleagues interject and sort of expand on perhaps what I've said so far.
You raised a good point about the phishing. But that sort of describes the general tactic of which they're exposed to. It doesn't necessarily mean what actually happens once they get phished. From what we've seen is a lot of people get targeting with business email compromises, so invoice fraud, and it's particularly susceptible to the smaller entities that don't necessarily have controlled financial payroll pay processes in place. And I think that's really, really damaging. It's been around for many years. It's nothing new. And I think it's even reached, the real estate market where they're transferring large sums of money. And I think that's a massive threat that they have faced. And organizations that haven't, taken the time to implement basic controls such as multi-factor authentication will continue to be affected by those threats, I believe, in 2023 and beyond. I don't think it's as bad as it was in the past, but I certainly think that these invoice fraud through phishing or commodity malware compromises are definitely here to stay for some time.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that, Jens, a slightly different perspective that I have. We often ask this question, and I think the question should be framed slightly differently, because for me, what I see is that the biggest risk to organizations remains that business leaders are not informed. And that piece of not being informed means that they don't act on the examples that you just gave, John, and the phishing pieces that you said, Sarb. And I still find it continually frustrating we're in 2023 and we're still having the same conversations that we were 10, 15 years ago about, as a responsible business owner, like any other business stream, you should know what your risks are and what are the things that are going to disrupt your business. And if you don't know that, you should know that by now. So I'd say the continuing risk that stays all the time is the amount of customers that we still meet where they haven't assessed and understood what the risks are. So if they're informed, they can address them. If they're not informed, they will be probably surprised when something happens.
Fantastic. I mean, obviously informing and that's a big part of our discussion today anyway. And thinking about if you are positioned as an SME in today's landscape, and from an operational perspective, I think obviously we think about a lot of time as well as the initial impact of an attack, but there's obviously a lot of ramifications reputationally if you are hit with a cyber attack, and just how important is it with that to kind of have a clear understanding of what your posture is as a business?
I'll just give a quick perspective on this. It's really important that if you are compromised, you are able to at least somewhat confidently be able to share with your customers, partners, what the state is, what you had what happened, and how you're managing it. As simple as that, just to be able to provide confidence to everyone. That there may be a requirement for you to inform the ICO, and again, it's around providing some confidence that we have this in place. Everything was locked down. This happened. We've addressed it. We're now understanding what we're doing, and we're moving forward. That requires you to have a plan. If you don't have a plan, being able to articulate that's very difficult. I'll pass over to these gents.
I totally agree with that. There was a saying that went around that in 2023 people aren't being judged for having a data breach. But in 2023, people are being judged for how they handle the data breach.
Yeah.
I think in the last 2 years, the ransomware pandemic, or whatever you want to call it, it's there's been data breaches every other week, and we've seen and supported many different customers going through that process. And there really is so much value in having open and clear communication with all your stakeholders internally and externally. And we've seen some really successful businesses suffer these major catastrophic events, but because of their communication, their leadership, and their openness, that they were able to resolve it in time and actually not lose any business, even though their business went down for 2 to 3 months, just as a result of that clear communication and setting expectations with their customers and suppliers, and just saying, can we just delay some of your orders and we'll double them in 2 months' time, for example, just to get through it. And I think that's really, really important.
I think for me, in terms of my thoughts on this, the word operational is quite important, and that in terms of the minds of small businesses and entrepreneurs, they seem to be stuck in a state that, I guess the only way to describe it is that the entrepreneurs were stuck way back century plus ago, where Henry Ford put the first production line together, and that probably at some point before that, where all the producers of whatever they were producing, whether it's carts, whatever, didn't have production lines. It was a long time later when everyone realized that you'd start doing things well, you need a system. And you need a system that you've thought about and you've got it in place as the natural way of doing things. So when car manufacturers set up today, it's a natural way of doing things. At the moment, the mindset of the entrepreneur is, I've set up this business to do this. I'll do security once I've made some money. When I've got something, I've set up this business to make money. I can't do security first to make money. I've got to do the business first to make money. And then when I've made money, I will do security. And it's that mindset that I'm talking about in terms of the entrepreneurs. Now we naturally think that when you do anything, you set up your systems because that's what the business is. And part of the thinking behind that entrepreneurs need to have in small businesses is that thinking, I need to set up the right set of systems for security as part of the business, as a natural step, as a natural operational step. and that cybersecurity posture is part of it. And at the moment, it's thought of as separate. I've worked in organisations where they hadn't registered for data protection. This is going back some time. And the reason, because they said, well, we wanted to get everything in place first before we register. What they didn't realise is at that time, by not registering, they were actually breaking the law. And I pointed that out to them. I said, look, you're breaking the law automatically by not registering. If you register, whatever else you're breaking the law for, at least if you start putting a strategy together of when you're going to do it and a plan for what you're going to do, then you won't be breaking the law. But you might have that in place, but without registering, you're breaking the law. And that's that mindset in thinking about, right, we're going to do this later at the right time. We're not going to do it now.
Yeah.
I think that ties into what Mo was saying about just the ill-informed business owners about cybersecurity risks and how to manage them. Maybe it's just a result of, as the industry the last 20 years, I haven't been in the industry that long, so maybe you guys can comment. But I feel that we've come a very long way. But 20 years ago, households and people were just sharing passwords, and cybersecurity was more of a thing for hacker movies and not something that was real and tangible. And it's only really those in the IT space or the financial sector that has sort of taken that security seriously up until very recent times. And most business owners today haven't had that experience of growing up in a fast tech-paced world where you need to care about your security and your passwords. And maybe it's a sort of a natural transition over the next 20 to 30 years as everyone today by default knows about cybersecurity. And when they become business owners, that they have a little bit more context behind that and a little bit more buy-in behind cybersecurity programs.
I think I'll just add one point, gents, and really for the audience, and that is, for me, my perspective on your incident response plan. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of complexity about everything that we're talking about in cybersecurity. The incident response plan relatively isn't, right? It is cheap, it's inexpensive, it's really just about time. If you can get everybody around the table to just discuss some scenarios such as, what if we don't have internet access? Let's just start with no internet access. What does that mean to us? And then you can start getting into more and more sort of elaborate scenarios where you go, okay, what happens if the thing that we really care about in our business isn't available, or it's stolen, or it's exploited, or it's made? So you can elaborate on all of those, but just walking through those steps can be really beneficial. So again, I think it's inexpensive and it can be really useful.
Fantastic. And when we're thinking about, when you're liaising with clients, and Mo, I want to kind of point to you on this one, because I know we've talked about this a lot in the past, and thinking about a goal-oriented approach to cybersecurity, but also an outcome-oriented one as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means for you, at Chameleon?
Yeah, there's a new terminology, and it's probably a geeky thing that cybersecurity has picked up, and it's around talking about outcome-based, right? And the difference between outcome and goal orientated is, I'd like to say historically, but it's not just historically, we still see it today, is companies have invested in cybersecurity tooling, but it hasn't achieved the outcome that we would have expected it to achieve. So that's why we focus on outcomes. So typically, for example, you may turn around and say, do you have security monitoring in place? Yes, we do. Is anybody looking at it? No, they're not. Have you got the right alert set up? No, we haven't. So the idea of having the security tool was to detect certain techniques, to be able to block them, and to allow you early stage warning to be able to respond. That's the outcomes that we're looking for, because they are the things that tie back to the risks that you have, which you're trying to address. That disconnect, so many organizations we go into, they've got lots of security tooling. There's an assumption that it is doing something. There's no assurance around that. And I'm sure as John will relay with the incidents that happen, the first time that you realize that your controls are not outcome orientated is when you've been compromised. So there's a nuance there. So it's really around, what is the effectiveness of it? And again, when we get the effectiveness, we tie that back to the business strategy, right? Which should always be the alignment.
Just to add to that, Mo, I totally agree. If you take it even lower than that in terms of anti-malware, and you may say, oh, have you got anti-malware? And they'll say yes. But if you do an audit, the chances are it's about 90% of the devices in the organization. And not only that, but it's not configured to update, or there's some other configuration issue. So it's things that, yes, we've got it, but we haven't done anything about it. It's on every machine. We haven't configured it. It doesn't auto update. It doesn't do this. It doesn't do the filtering. There's so many aspects to the tool itself that wouldn't have been done. And it's not consistent either. It might be that you've got an old anti-malware on one machine and a newer one on something else, and on your Macs you've got nothing because Macs never get hit by malware, is the thinking. And then you've got some other machines. So it's a variety of things that can be, where the bottom line is, as Mo was saying, is the outcome is different, and you need to look at the outcome. What is the outcome we've got as a result of this tool? And if we're not using it properly, if the desired outcome isn't going to be there, then what's that tool doing? You need to be able to justify and implement it in the correct way to be sure that the outcome you're hoping to achieve will actually be achieved.
Don't you think there's also a sense of, you know, that the goalposts have changed, right? 10 years ago, anti-malware would have been all you ever needed, whereas today that's effectively just a thing that will prevent known bad things from running. But with the explosion in terms of cyber attacks and people, the way that they do it, we published a paper about the professionalization of cybercrime and describing how many different people can, you know, be a part of one attack, and everyone just little specialists doing every little piece of it. You really need to be focusing on newer technologies, more advanced capabilities, and it's sort of an ever-changing field. It's not something sort of a tick box. You know, we've done it once. Let's not review it again. So instead of, you know, asking, do you have anti-malware, it's like you should be asking yourself the outcome. Do you have an effective way of detecting and preventing and detecting modern day attacks suited to your risk profile, of course.
So John, can I ask you a question? I know I shouldn't be asking it because James is the moderator here. But just to elaborate in real-time examples, and obviously you redact any of the stories, but I mean, for you get customers turn up to your door who have been compromised, and presumably they have had or thought that they had some levels of security controls in place. Is there a theme that you see around, you know, where those compromises came from? Is it through, you know, lack of vulnerability management, or is it access, account management? Is there anything that you can share?
Yeah, so I think unfortunately it's nothing new. People sort of get tired of saying you need to patch your things on your perimeter. You need to prevent phishing, mailbox filters and products in that sense. But those two are generally the two big candidates. I think, you know, in 2022 and onwards, we've seen a bit of a shift. I think there's a lot of sort of legitimate access via credentials. So if you're not having multi-factor authentication on pretty much absolutely everything on the perimeter, people's credentials get compromised all the time. If somebody, you know, has a keylogger on their personal laptop from, you know, their child downloading illegal torrents, and you know, at some point those credentials get resold on the dark web, and then eventually somebody says, you know, I'll buy, you know, these lots of credentials for a couple of dollars, and then they realize they get access to a large enterprise estate. And I think that's a newer challenge that we're facing, because it's more legitimate access. They're accessing the systems like a user would, using remote desktop, and actually not necessarily using malware along the way. But you know, most of the time they do, you know, use malware on key systems, but I'd say legitimate credentials are one of sort of the next rising and biggest problem that we're faced with at the moment.
Fantastic. And so were you going to elaborate on that?
What I was going to say first, though, is that in terms of SMEs and the attack surface that they have, compared to enterprises where you cannot bring in new devices and just connect them onto your network, in smaller organizations, almost anyone and everyone can come along and connect a device to the network, and the attack surface, it actually grows and it's not controlled. However, the thinking is, and logical thinking is, oh, well, we're a small organization. We're not going to be attacked. Nobody's going to know that we're here. Nobody's going to know what we've got, what we're doing, and so on. I mean, last year, I was doing some work with an organization. One of the investigators, who's a friend of mine, we were talking about an incident he dealt with, and it was in the UK, a National Health Trust. And in that National Health Trust, they had a storage box which they kept as an emergency in case they needed it, and they're never expecting it would run out of disk space. And they noticed it was running out of disk space, so they called in my friend, and by the time he actually got round to sort of a week later when he come in to investigate, it really reached the limit. And his investigation showed that what had happened was that this storage got used by an attacker, where they'd collected from that health authority credit card details, patient details, operational details, lots of data. They use this as storage, but how they took it out of the organization, because what my friend couldn't figure out as an investigator was how they got in, but he figured out how they got out. And how they got out was, in the boardroom, there were some televisions, and the televisions had their Wi-Fi on, and this thing called Wi-Fi Direct, which as a protocol that TVs and other devices use. The original protocol was secure, but because it was limited in scope, lots of vendors added functionality, and the added functionality is what made it insecure. And it was through this protocol being on that they had managed to get out, and he could identify that they had got out from the TVs. Had they been able to clean up after themselves, no one would have been any the wiser that there'd been a compromise. And that was in a large organization where they were looking for things and they were surprised. Whereas in a small organization, if no one's looking, you're going to be in a position where things are happening and you've been compromised, your data's been taken, you may still have malware or whatever it might be. And this could be 2-3 years down the road. And that's the difficulty in terms of the attack surface expanding for the smaller organization, because they're not controlling what they're putting in compared to the larger organization.
It's actually, I'd like to jump into there as well. But I'd say on the flip side, smaller organizations have greater control of their network, and at least they know, how many TVs they own, or where they might be positioned. Mo, you might be able to speak from your experience of managing larger enterprises. They a lot of legacy technical debt, and what we see is so many times we'll have an incident and we'll track the root cause from a couple of servers, and then we'll find an IP range, and then we'll say to the admins, hey, we need these systems, or what does this network range do? And they say, that's not our network. And we're like, that's your network. And they're like, nope, that's impossible. And then we show them the sort of forensics, and we're like, this network exists. And they'll be like, oh, that's a legacy data center we forgot to turn off 5 or 6 years ago. And it's a different problem, but I'd say everyone is faced with this sort of asset management and just not necessarily knowing their true attack surface and in terms of what's there. It's a common problem, but if you've got no plans in dealing with it, and you haven't started at least tracking what you own, which systems there are, basic network diagrams, it's going to be a lot harder when you need to deal with it once you've grown, once you've had your massive Series B funding or whatever it is, to get you where you want to be to invest in security. It's way easier to get it done right in the beginning steps, and just starting with the basics, basic network diagrams, basic thinking what's on your perimeter, what's in your internal zones, and just having a plan for maturing them over time.
Yeah, I think what I can add, John, is definitely complexity remains the enemy of cybersecurity, right? That's the bigger the organization, the more complex. So definitely we do see that. And I think there is this CSI mentality that you have from watching the TV programs where someone, the conversation goes something like this. right, let's put a tracker on him and let's see when he uses his credit card. And the next minute it's like, there he is, he's on CCTV, he's on this corner. There you go, he's moving on to this system. In reality, the person who monitors the CCTV is on leave. The person who's replacing him doesn't know what the logging for the admin portal is, and all these other real world scenarios that you see. But the other piece, I think, is that complexity comes with the growth of the business. So what you'll find is, as the business grows, so for example, at the point of when you're getting a CRM system in, or when you're using to look more and more business applications, SaaS systems, that complexity starts to come in. You start to employ more people. You've now got a sales team, you've now got a HR team, and all of these, it starts to resonate there as well. If those controls aren't in place around documenting your network infrastructure, what those systems are, what those admin credentials are, then it's at that point as well, it can really impact you because you haven't got that visibility around your estate.
Fantastic. And I mean, so we've obviously touched on, complexity, and I think it's also a good time for us to look at, simplicity as well. So from Sarb, maybe we'll start with you. What would, in your opinion, when people are trying to increase their knowledge of cybersecurity, whether you're a small business or maybe you're a growing business, what would you say are the simple but effective ways you can kind of educate yourselves and be a little bit more aware?
Starting with understanding what it is you're trying to achieve and what can go wrong. So if you start, and what we suggest is having an effective asset register on day one. You got to know what you've got, what you haven't got, and you got to know who's got it, why they've got it, what's on it, and so on. And that, I think, is a good place to start from, because effectively, if you do things right and your asset register is good, you know what your network is, you know how many routers you've got, you know how many. So if you start from the outer layers, your network, you know your devices, you know how many accounts you've got, web accounts, how many, all of that, and effectively, if you're using SaaS services, that they are assets as well, and you identify those. So you start with understanding what your estate is, but equally looking outside and where you're going to learn about what to do about these things. A lot of people do point to the NCSE, so I'm not going to be different at this stage and say look elsewhere. But what you've got to remember is that there's no single right way of doing this. And why there isn't a single right way of doing this is because 95% of businesses in almost every country in the world are SMEs. And to picture them or to colour them as being a standard way that you will need to approach cybersecurity in each organisation is wrong. There are a range of different ways that you can approach it, but I would say look at things like 5 steps from NCSE, look at Cyber Essentials, because what those things include that you need to do are the very, very basics. And if you start with the very basics, it's possible that your small organisation may not get bigger and you may not do much else. But to begin with, if you start there, if you look at what the requirements are around updates in terms of security, OS updates, application updates, browser updates, all of those sorts of things, passwords, authentication, all the things that you've got there, you may not understand all of it, but knowing that these are the things you need to start from, that provides a fairly good starting point as to what you need to do. In terms of how you need to do it, that's basically the work that the organisation I work for, that we're looking at how to make it simple to take the what into converting it to the how people actually get it done, and get it done fairly quickly and in an order that is focused on the risk of the organisation or to the organisation, and taking them through that perspective, because the risks that one organisation face are fairly different from another organisation, but there are some similarities, and you can take those similarities and start with those first, and that's what 5 steps and Cyber Essentials gives you.
Fantastic. And I mean, moving to a different area completely, when it comes to incident response, every business is different, and I think, John, you're going to have some really good insights for this this discussion. But I think when we're managing budget requirements for SMEs or even bigger scale businesses, how would you say is the best way of navigating the circumstance whilst, you know, offering support and advice, you know, when you've got that budget requirement in the background?
Yeah, so I think yeah, we can talk through how we handle it internally. And effectively, that's just gone through our standard scoping process. When we have a first call for assistance, you know, we try and get the victim organization to speak through, you know, the incident that they're dealing with or what they've experienced, just to get an understanding of, you know, where they're at and what they have found and what they know, what they don't know. We might prompt them along the way just to get that further context. You know, as if it's a new customer, we don't know if they've gone through Cyber Essentials. We don't know if they've, you know, got EPP or EDR, just to, you know, prevent and detect advanced things on their network. So we're trying to get those things a little bit slowly through the situation, and then just effectively get them in their own words to describe, you know, what is it exactly that they would like us to help them with. You know, what is the outcome that they would like to see after engaging us? And you know, for more mature organizations that might have a big shopping list, you know, those that have done through IR engagements in the past, and they might say, hey, we need this, we need that, which is fine. And sometimes, you know, the smaller organizations, maybe budget conscious, or just like, you know, we just want to make sure this never happens again. And then we'll give them an example based on the, you know, the size of the environment. We'll just sort of assign, this is more or less you know, how much it would cost for us to do root cause analysis to find out where this thing came from, where this thing, how much data may have been exfiltrated, if that's a risk. And normally that's one of the things that they first park. You know, if they don't have if it's going to cost more money to do, let's at least get started with a basic investigation, figure out where we are, and we're just quite open about it. Fortunately, you know, for us, we've got quite a large amount of products and services available, that we do have things that do fit the smaller businesses or sort of more budget conscious companies. But at the very least, we say, let's get a time box engagement for a couple of days. You know, we've been talking about the first 72 hours of a cyber attack being, you know, very crucial to be able to get an understanding of what's going on and to put those containment or mitigating controls in place. We say, let's get a small engagement, let's start, see what we're actually finding, get the technical experts looking at that, working towards the goals that or the outcomes we've agreed on the scoping call, and take it from there. I think every incident responder I know, not just in my team, but in the industry, you know, the reason why we do the job is, you know, to help organizations in times of need. So I'd encourage, you know, organizations that need assistance to go through, you know, your vendors or supplier lists, to, you know, just have a phone call and just to discuss with an incident responder exactly the situation you're faced with, and you know, a little bit of advice, half an hour phone call might all be that's required, really. But I do think, you know, we as an industry, we have a very long way to go to be able to bridge the gap of, you know, supporting all the victims in the world of cyber attacks and cybercrime, and you know, we need to pay it forward. So I encourage everyone in sort of the blue team. There's always a saying that in the red team, you know, people are posting exploits and vulnerabilities left, right, and center, open source to test it out. But on the blue team side, you know, it's not as positive, and we do need to come together collectively to, you know, help each other out. And in the, you know, in the long run, even if it's not, you know, business today or business tomorrow, you know, maybe 6 months, 12 months down the line, an organization might say, hey, you know what, that company really helped me in a time of need. Just a little bit of advice, and it, you know, it does, you know, tend to come back.
Yeah, and keeping the conversation going. I think that's critical across the whole industry, as well as just cyber, and, you know, in the physical realm as well. I think having those discussions is really key. And Mo, I can see you're itching to answer about this as well. Do you want to give us some of your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, no, I haven't got anything to add really. I just wanted to elaborate on a point that John brought up, and I just wanted to ask John the question just so that the audience is clear. So if I understand this correctly, John, if a company comes to you and is compromised and is looking for help, and you're looking to ascertain what resources and what time that will take, which essentially moves to a budget proposal, right? The better organized and the better informed the organization is for giving you the information that you need, the more robust, right, quote that you're going to be able to provide them because they've got all the answers in place. So actually, what I'm saying in a roundabout way is the better you've got your house, the better you've managed your house, it will reduce the cost of bringing in a company to help support you in a post-incident.
Definitely, 100%. I mean, there's a quick wins that just having sufficient detection capability in your environment, sort of technologies such as EDR. There are sort of lower cost options to those, but they really go a long way. I think it's pretty standard for every single incident response team to make use of EDR technology just for investigating, just picking up on detections. They've been around. It's nothing new. Although we do struggle, most companies that engage us, have very limited deployment, or it's not maintained, as we were chatting about previously. And just having those basics in place can really go a long way. We haven't touched about logs. People might get tired of hearing logs, and yes, there's you got to have to find the balance of logging everything and storing everything and having massive bills to at least getting the basic logging right. Having just your firewall logs and being able to say, okay, let's just check something on the firewall logs instead of looking at 100 or 1,000 machines for signs of an attack. There's also those little quick wins that we're able to rapidly scope and identify the situation that we're faced with. As a company, we have many different partners, and we know many different other companies in the industry that we are able to work with. And if it's not sort of suited to our needs, we will pass them on, or just say, hey, I think you should go chat to these people over here. They might be able to help you out. But as a business, at WithSecure, our company vision is that we see a world where nobody experiences a serious loss from a cyber attack. And I think my team takes that quite seriously, in the sense of, we really need to help people. And we're never going to turn down a small charity or a school away, because at the end of the day, they need industry to support them. And I think we all have a role to fulfill in making sure that we're at least able to give them that high-level advice to get the basics right, even if it includes rebuilding the network, because that's probably re-imaging a laptop or buying a new laptop is a lot cheaper than getting an incident response firm to come and have a look and say if it was compromised or not.
Yeah,
fantastic. And I mean, just kind of wrapping up, guys. I mean, across the wider business landscape and looking at kind of sectors from a wider perspective, I'll ask it as more of an open-ended question for whoever who wants to jump in. But are there any sectors which spring to kind of jump out to you guys as we look ahead in the next few months and next few years of which are going to be particularly vulnerable, you think, maybe off the back of the pandemic or anything like that? Is it in healthcare, retail? Is there any sectors which you think are really kind of exposed?
I think I'll comment on that. I think we need to first define exactly vulnerable to what. I think over the last few years, everyone's probably bored of hearing the word ransomware, but I'd say that's one of the biggest impacts to most organizations. And if you look at, I think there's some public reporting recently by Sophos, State of Ransomware Report 2023, and shows the distribution of sectors that have been targeted by attack. And it really shows that nobody's sort of shielded from the threat of ransomware attacks. I'd say historically it was always the banks that were attacked for crime syndicates because they had money or they had something they could easily cash out from. But as soon as criminals were able to monetize their attacks, I think the professionalization of cybercrime, so targeting any organization and saying, here's passwords for this company, or here's access to this router, they're able to sell that on. That could be targeting anyone. That's up to later down the line in terms of the big gangs trying to cash out. If it's targeting a bank, which is probably not as common these days as it may have been in the past, where they can spend a lot less effort for organizations that haven't invested in cybersecurity to run ransomware across it and use that as a means to cashing out for them as a criminal syndicate. So I'd really say every organization is at risk, and I'd say particularly those that haven't taken cybersecurity seriously in the past, and those that haven't prepared for it. It's a matter of just getting the basics right, and starting your journey sooner rather than later. Would anyone agree on that? Feel free to dispute that.
I don't think there's anything to dispute there. I'll just add on. There's a military term that we used to use, which is not to worry about the bullet with your name on it, but worry about the bullet named to whoever. And that's the case, I think, with businesses in terms of who's going to be targeted. Right? It's likely that you're just going to be caught in this analogy, the crossfire, rather than you actually being targeted. Again, I agree with what you're saying, John. It's essentially if the businesses that are not informed, the business leaders that have not taken the time to address and understand their cybersecurity posture are the ones that are at risk. And that's irrelevant of industry, that's irrelevant of size, it's irrelevant of location and country. That's I think the common thread that runs between all of them.
Yeah, just to add to that, I entirely agree with both of you, and I think the angle I'd come at it from is that the bottom line is all organisations need to do more than something. The something was yesteryear, and we've got to that point which people will say we've got anti-malware, we're done. It needs to be a bit more structured than that. And if you're not able to do it yourself, then you need to go out to organisations like Chameleon, like WithSecure, and find someone who can help you, because the bottom line is you have to do more than just something. And that something was the past. And hopefully, that vision that John talked about, that WithSecure has, that, in the future, the loss will be minimal to organisations. If they are doing more than something, that is achievable. But if they continue to do next to nothing, then I think it's not achievable.
And I think that's a really, really good note to end on, guys. And I just want to say, thank you once again for joining me for this discussion. It's been really valuable. And I hope everyone listening, will take some really key insights away from this. Feel free to connect with all the guys on LinkedIn and share this conversation and keep the conversation going. And thanks for listening. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, James.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks, James.
Cheers.
Bye, Mo. Bye, John.
Cheers, gents.
Thank you.